the hour. Welcome back to the afternoon session. I'm Stacey Delacat. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. We are now going to talk about the McStay family murders, a case we have been talking about since it got underway on January 7th. Most of you by now know that there is no court in this case on Fridays. Typically, it would resume on Monday, but this week, there's no court on Monday. Tuesday is a state holiday out in California where this is happening, and so the judge said, hey, let's not have court on Monday either. So we're going to have to wait till Wednesday till court resumes again. You're looking at some pictures now from trial that we've seen in this past week, the past few weeks leading up to this. Already we've seen a number of witnesses. Joining me live this afternoon is Marni Snyder, criminal defense attorney. And Marni, you and I were just talking about this. I mean, this is supposed to be from the outset. The attorneys, the judge said this is going to be a 6-month trial. I mean, it's not hard to see why when you see they're dark on Fridays. I mean, yesterday they adjourned early because the judge had a dentist appointment. As it is, they have an hour-and-a-half break every day, the jurors, for lunch, and they end court at 4:15 as opposed to 5 or 5:30. So clearly, this is, dragging out. I think a lot of viewers feel that way too. Wow, this is really taking a long time to get through stuff. Marni, what's the impact on jurors when this does sort of drag out like this, as opposed to kind of condensing all the witnesses and evidence into a shorter amount of time?
Well, there's a couple things. So one is, it's my understanding that California allows the jurors to take notes. So it's good because they're going to be able to refer back to those notes instead of just relying on their recollection. On the other hand, though, the judge is going to tell them at the end of the case that their recollection is controlling. You can write something down incorrectly as well as you can remember it incorrectly. And they have to consider all of the evidence to the best of their ability. So they're really going to have a lot of pressure during deliberations to think back over all of these months. Obviously, for the prosecution, it breaks up the emotional connection that the jury can have with some of these witnesses. But they do get a little bit of benefit from the prosecution. As long as it takes them to put on their case, they're going to argue how much evidence they put up. They can certainly get that argument that the quantity of their evidence is really compelling. And since it's a circumstantial case anyway, they're allowed to kind of fill in those gaps. We showed you this and this, which leads us to believe this. So they have a little bit of an advantage there. Right.
I mean, we have the closing arguments. I mean, from an attorney's perspective, is it a good thing to have this stretched out in this way?
I don't like it. I don't like doing cases that are long like that for a few reasons, for human reasons. I'm exhausted, and I also have to remember everything that was said and the points that I get across. And I certainly don't want my closing argument to be 1 week out of those 6 months of trial. It's not fair to anyone.
Yeah.
It's just too hard. It's hard to explain your case when it goes on for this.
And in addition, I mean, this is a case that has a lot of kind of nitty-gritty forensic evidence. There's a lot of cell phone data. There's the QuickBooks data. It's not so cut and dry. He saw this, she saw this, and the medical examiner testified this. So I think there's a lot of details to keep track of for all of us. Let's get into some of that past testimony now, starting with Detective Edward Bachmann, one of the lead investigators from San Bernardino. Let's hear what he testified earlier in this trial.
What else did you observe as the grave was excavated?
As we started to remove the dirt around the head, we uncovered portions of the hair and specifically around the head. The way that the body was oriented in the grave, we located a large wound to the back left portion of the decedent's head. So up here would be the victim's head. The hole that I described would be right here, where there was obviously a wound to his head. You can see here his back continues down. These are the victim's ribs. As we continued uncovering it, we located a white extension cord that was wrapped around the victim's neck that continued south through the grave. The way that the victim's laid out in the grave, his legs continue down here. At this stage, you can see part of the bottom of the victim's legs here, but there were no skeletal remains located below the kneecaps inside the grave, or below the knees there.
Well, that was certainly a graphic image there being shown to jurors, and up on your screen of a skeletal torso believed to be that of Joseph McStay, wrapped in some wire. I mean, it looks like a fossil, something you would see in a museum. Marni Joe Snyder still with me via Skype. You know, when the jurors see it, and look, there's some more images, the skeletons, the skulls, rather, of Joseph McStay and his family. I mean, those are very graphic in a sense. I mean, this isn't a bloodied corpse. It's far beyond that.
Right. Because it's not a bloody corpse, it might not feel as upsetting at first to the jury, but they're really hearing bit by bit about what happened to these people before they died, because that is something that the doctors and the experts can tell us by looking at these remains. So the prosecution is trying to show really how brutal this was and then connect that brutality to a motive, which is so important in this case. So this kind of testimony is really important for them to hear, even though it doesn't seem as emotional as if you had that corpse that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you that certainly, I mean, you or gunshot wounds, that's really hard to look at. This is almost like, it's hard to imagine, wow, you see the family picture and then that's what was left of them after their remains were buried in a grave. I mean, it does have a bit of a shock factor.
Well, yeah, and then this beautiful family being buried all together is certainly another disturbing factor there. But I think really this is also a necessity, and I think that's why these are going to be so easily entered into evidence. They're not prejudicial. They absolutely are going to connect what happened to these people to a motive and a motive to a killer.
Yeah, let's go ahead now and hear more from Detective Bachmann, who was the lead investigator at that scene in the desert where the remains were found.
As the excavation continued, please describe what you were seeing.
So as it continued, like I stated, we located the white extension cord. The extension cord was found to be tied in a knot around the victim's neck, and it continued south through the grave. It was found that the victim was wrapped in the white blanket that we initially saw, what we believe to be a white blanket, a white woven cloth of some sort, and the cloth was wrapped with a red tie-down, like a tie-down type strap.
Describe what you're seeing or what you recognize.
The photo here basically is at toward the completion of the excavation process. So the way that we excavated is we tried to basically pedestal the victim there in the ground so that we could see the way that he was laid out inside the grave. As I spoke earlier, you can see here's the red strap that is wrapped around the cloth blanket. So part of the blanket was able to be removed, but it was very brittle due to the fact that it was soaked in decomposition fluids. There's the white strap that actually goes up, and it was wrapped around the victim's neck. The victim was clothed in a green shirt. Part of the green shirt was located there. He had on gray cloth shorts, and then a set of what were labeled printing as gray Hanes underwear.
You mentioned in there that no leg segments were found below the kneecap. Is that demonstrated by what you're seeing in this exhibit?
Yes, sir. So his basically what would be the femoral condyles, what was described to me as through one of the, I think it was through Dr. Gray, basically extends right here, but there were no lower portions of the decedent's legs located inside the grave.
Did you find anything that appeared to be feet?
No, sir.
Or at least readily recognizable as feet?
No. After we removed the victim from the grave, we located a pair of socks underneath the victim's body, but there was nothing of any indication of lower legs or feet there inside the grave.
Is there a compass depicted in 212 also to...
Well, the witness there, Detective Bachmann, talking about some cloth blanket that was found near the remains, saying part of the blanket was brittle, saying that there was a white strap around the victim's neck, and part of a green shirt was located, talking about some other articles of clothing. He mentioned there was no leg segment found below the kneecap. So again, really some graphic details here as this continues, and Detective Bachmann was on the stand for a while, Marni, talking jurors through these photos.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they have to do. They have to show how brutal this is, what a strange situation it is for this family to be buried together like this, who the brutality was focused on, right? And that's all going to go to, this is why we think it's this guy that's the killer. It is really compelling.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, we see all this, and now the prosecutors have to link it to the motive here. They're claiming that Charles Merritt's motive was money, that he owed money to Joseph McStay, that he was in gambling debt, but it's also not a necessarily huge sum of money. I mean, I think it was that prosecutors have pointed to an email saying that McStay said he'd overpaid Merritt by $42,000, so that is a lot of money. It's interesting, though, because does that match up with the brutality of this, driving them all the way out to the desert, burying the remains like this? I mean, it's a really complex plot, if you will.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's what makes this case so interesting, is because I'm not sure how compelled I am by that amount of money and killing of 4 people. But I think what they're going to do to use it is to show that Mr. Merritt was the actual, that Mr. Merritt was the actual target of all that brutality, and that maybe the other people in the family were killed because of being witnesses or as some sort of necessity, and then that they can show might be that money motive, right? They're not going to point to someone who might be having an affair with one of them, something like that. They're trying to show where this brutality was narrowed in on in order to connect the motive.
Yeah. No, I think you're right there. Well, certainly we heard from a lot of people who were at the crime scene. Next, let's hear from Heatherly Radcliffe. She was a crime scene specialist.
And I left you 240 up there. Can you please tell us what that is?
240 is an electrical cord socket that was located in the area.
Was that similarly collected as potential evidence?
Yes, it was.
To give us some perspective, did you take a moment to use one of the aerial photographs to mark out where some of the evidence was found outside of the graves and around them?
Yes, I did.
So I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 753. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. And is that the photograph you drew on prior to coming to court?
Yes.
When you collect pieces of evidence, I'm going to put it on the overhead. When you collect pieces of evidence, how do you inventory them and catalog them?
When items of evidence are collected and they're packaged and collected and they are transported back to my lab, once in the lab, all of the items are itemized, and they're given item letter A1, A2, A3, and I. So that item letter sticks with that piece of evidence through the time I collect it to it goes to our DNA unit, and that's what that item is further referred to as.
And on this exhibit, did you mark the approximate location of grave A and grave B as well?
Yes, I did.
So I see several on this half of the bra.
Yes, I did.
And can you show it to us and describe what you observed?
When looking at the photograph on the left side of the bra, there appeared to be, I call it a white substance. It, to me, was consistent with paint, but I don't know for sure, excuse me, exactly what it was.
It had a distinct pattern to it, correct?
Yes, sort of a drip. It was dripping.
Can you orient what you're seeing to us on how it would be if worn? Is that possible?
If this bra, this would be the left cut, so it would be the dripping, the drip, the flow stains right here, where it could the substance appeared to have flowed or flowed towards the center. If it was being worn at the time, it would have been towards the center of the bra.
Some more graphic evidence there in the McStay family murder trial. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more from this California case. Stay with us. Crime, welcome back. We're talking about the McStay family murders case out of California. Court is dark today. It will not resume until Wednesday. So in the meantime, we're going back to some highlights of this trial. We're now at day 17. This trial expected to stretch several more months. So there are a lot of details to recap and remember. We've been talking about the crime scene, and in the last segment, we saw pictures of the decomposed remains of Joseph McStay. We saw a bra belonging to his wife. We saw a cord, an electric cord that had been tied around one of their necks. A lot of disturbing stuff. Let's go on now and hear from Dr. Alexis Gray, who was a forensic anthropologist who was called to the scene.
Remains which began to go forward, and then I had seen some remains sticking out that I thought probably indicated a fourth.
Okay. You indicated that you saw some remains sticking out. Do you recall whether they were sticking out at grave A or grave B?
Well, you would have to tell me which one we designate as grade A or grade B. I don't remember.
So if the one in front of you, if we looked at that and said that's grave B.
Okay, grade B. Then it would be grade A.
So you determined that you're dealing with at least 2 adults and a child, and potentially another victim because you see something sticking out of the other grave, which we'll for now call grave A. What do you and Deputy Avery decide to do?
I asked him to call it in, and we asked for a deputy who can stand watch over the area until a recovery can be mounted the next day, because it was winter, and I think by the time we found the second grave, it was later. It was past 1, past 2, and we certainly couldn't mount something that large before it got dark.
You know, that's my fault. I didn't ask you that question. Do you know approximately what time it was that you responded to the scene that day?
No.
Okay.
I want to say 11. It could have been 1. It was around lunchtime.
Okay. So and then you had to drive there.
Dr. Alexis Gray, forensic anthropologist, and one of the things that I got from that testimony, and Marni Jo Snyder still with me via Skype, tell me if you agree, is really a reminder that this is a particularly difficult crime scene. It's in the desert. There are animal tracks, there are motorcycle tracks, as she talked about, but also remember, 3 years have presumably passed since these bodies were buried there out in the elements in the desert. I mean, anything really could have happened. So it's very different from, say, showing up to a home or something where someone has just been murdered.
Oh, absolutely. And it's very, very important for the prosecution to point that out. And like they have with multiple witnesses, explaining exactly why that is, what evidence can be recovered, what evidence cannot be recovered, and whether or not their investigation of that evidence was thorough. Because if they're not going to find DNA evidence that they're going to present against the defendant, they need to also show that they did that due diligence to make sure that there wasn't any evidence that pointed to someone else. They haven't charged the wrong. So they need to show that everything that they did out there was as thorough and clean as possible, and that it's kind of the weather, crime scene, and delay in finding the bodies that are the problems with recovering evidence that is relevant to who did the crime.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, I imagine there was a lot of investigation as to whether some of what was found out there is even from that crime scene. I mean, a lot of stuff can pile up in the desert when people are passing through, animals are passing through over the course of 3 years. Let's go back and hear a little bit more from Dr. Alexis Gray.
No, but when you say do studies, I hear do research.
Okay.
Have I done research in regards to DNA? No. Have I collected a great deal of DNA? Yes. Okay. Did I attend classes that were about DNA during my graduate career? Yes.
Is it practical to try to recover DNA from a crime scene like this?
Objection, foundation.
Overruled. No.
Your Honor, I haven't heard. Can we be heard?
No. The objection's overruled.
It isn't practical because the possibility for contamination just from the local environment is too high.
When you
foundation.
Overruled.
When you say the local environment, what is it that you're referring to?
I'm talking about that desert with, you know, the plants and the decomposing organisms and all of those things. DNA can be recovered in a lab from the remains or from anything if it's intact. but it's not something that we would be trying to necessarily cover at that location.
Any objection to the foundation?
More from Dr. Alexis Gray. Marni, you sort of alluded to this before, but I think a crime scene like this lends itself to a lot of openings for the defense. Do you agree?
I do, and I think that that's what the prosecution is really trying to do, is just shut down those defenses more than that there's any really interesting evidence as to who did this crime in the desert, right? So I think that's really what it is. They're saying that we did all the investigation we could, and we still, as the prosecution team, believe that it points to Charles Merritt, and that's who the doer is. I think that's why they're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly over the course of the last 17 days of trial, the prosecution has stumbled a little in proving that connection. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, much more from this trial. Stay with us. We're back on the afternoon session talking about the McStay family murders, and a big factor in this case, one of the big questions, one of the big pieces of evidence has to do with QuickBooks. It's a computer software basically that allows users to do bookkeeping, to write checks, so on and so forth. QuickBooks plays a really big part in this case because prosecutors allege basically that Charles Merritt, the Joseph McStay we know had a QuickBooks account that he used to pay some employees, and prosecutors allege that Charles Merritt basically opened a second account in Joseph McStay's name and attempted to pay himself through that account. Well, before we go to the testimony on QuickBooks, because yesterday we did hear from a representative from that company, let's go to what the defense said at the beginning of this trial about what they thought about the information from QuickBooks.
Practice of doing business with EIP and between him and Joseph. After handling something for Joseph, Merritt would always call him to update. So, he wrote 4 checks and deleted them at 12:39. Then he calls and leaves a message 10 minutes later. And it's done. Then he's on the phone with QuickBooks for 108 minutes on the 8th. This is when they want to switch from online to desktop QuickBooks. Why do you do that? Online QuickBooks you can access from anywhere. Anybody can if they have your password. If you want to keep your business information from people you don't trust anymore, you switch to a desktop. Nobody can access unless you're sitting at that desktop. Joseph created more checks on the 2nd at 11:37. Called Merritt 3 minutes later, let him know, hey, yeah, this works. We can do it. Creates and deletes check on the 4th at 8:01. Last phone call at 8:28. Hey, it's done. That shows that Joseph's still alive when that car's leaving at 7:47. I don't know who was there. He's still alive, doing business. He's alive till the morning of the 5th.
So let's recap a little bit here. This whole thing with the QuickBooks started 3 days before the family seemed to disappear back in February of 2010. And basically in this second account that was created under Joseph McStay's name, someone logged in and out over the course of several days, creating checks, deleting checks, creating more checks, deleting more checks, which was created for Chase Merritt in the amount of $2,495. That one, I believe, was cash. Well, the defense's explanation in all of this is that Joseph McStay told Charles Merritt, his business associate, to do this for him. He says every time he did an action on QuickBooks, he then picked up the phone. He called Joseph, it's done, it's done. Okay, maybe a feasible explanation. The problem is McStay isn't around to tell us otherwise, right, Marni?
Exactly, and there's a lot of speculation as to why someone might do this as a business owner. And because the defense is also pointing to a different business associate as a possible suspect, I don't find this all that compelling. especially when we find out the amount of the check as the motive for killing someone. I mean, I think it's something that the prosecution needs to explore so that at the end they can say, you know, we've put it all out there for you jurors, we haven't hidden anything, this is our theory of the case, and we've shown you all the devious things that have happened. But I'm not super impressed just with this whole book issue. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with you. I think if anything, kind of the most striking part is this kind of speculation on the part of the prosecution. Did Charles Merritt illicitly call up and create this other account without Joseph knowing? Doing so a few days before he went missing, was this some sort of planning? I mean, I don't know if that's kind of what the prosecution wants jurors to think. That was kind of the impression I got from hearing some of the testimony actually from the expert we heard from yesterday, and that's Ryan Baker, who used to work with QuickBooks. He testified via Skype about helping out with these accounts linked to Joseph McStay. Let's take a listen.
Okay, so there's additional steps that have to be followed in order for that to occur. Is that right? So someone calls you and indicates that they are Joseph McStay and they want to delete their account. What was the next step that you took?
The next step that I took was I told them that I was going to send them an email, that they needed to fill out the email and send it back to me, and then we would start the process of removing the information from the servers.
And would that email have been sent to the custom@earthinspiredproducts.com account?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us essentially what the email says that you send out?
The email is basically just a small protection that says, you can please fill out this email that says my name, or you would fill in your own name. You hereby get permission for QuickBooks to delete all the information for business name. And they would fill that information out and send it back to me that they give permission to do that.
So if somebody else had ordered a new version of QuickBooks on the Joseph McStay 69@hotmail.com, would that information populate over to the custom@earthinspiredproducts.com account?
No, ma'am, it would not, because the account itself, if they purchase another version of QuickBooks, the purchase of the program is not associated to the business records.
Okay.
They can purchase another version or another subscription with another email or anything like that if we're walking to a store.
Okay.
Buy a QuickBooks.
And do you recall what is there a set line that QuickBooks uses for customer service calls?
Well, the testimony, a little technical there, as Ryan Baker, who used to work with QuickBooks, talked about taking this phone call from someone, you heard the prosecutor say, for someone who claimed to be Joseph McStay, asking about deleting an account. Baker then said, well, when you want to delete an account, you have to send QuickBooks an email describing your request. So he followed up with the caller, sent an email, said, send me back the details about why you want to cancel the request, tried to follow up, but heard nothing. That was it. Radio silence. Marni, was there anything you took from that? I mean, the part, as I said, was the prosecutor saying, someone pretending to be, someone who we assume is Joseph McStay calling.
And what is it of?
I mean, I hope there's something more to follow up if the prosecution is going to try to get the jurors to make that leap and speculate along with her. Because the fact that the call was made doesn't add as much as you would like. And certainly there's something about that call or the nature of following QuickBooks procedure and following it to the T and sending that email that really makes anything less suspicious to me. I'm hoping that, it's a circumstantial case, so they have to put in everything and they are allowed to connect it later and with other witnesses. But I didn't really know why she made that leap to maybe this wasn't him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And, also the significance of this, I mean, it is strange, I guess, in and of itself that someone would call and say, I want to delete an account, how do I do it? And then the representative tells you how, and then, email, and you just kind of drop it there. I mean, who knows? Maybe the person, they decide, never mind, I don't want to do this. Or, if it was someone impersonating Joseph McStay, maybe they realize they don't have access to his email. Whatever it is, it certainly opens up even more questions, I think, than I had before going into this. We're going to hear a little bit more from Ryan Baker, that former representative from QuickBooks, but first, a quick break. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back. So we're talking about QuickBooks, this computer application, what role it plays in this case. Well, apparently prosecutors want us to think it plays a pretty big one because of this account that Joseph McStay had that he used to pay employees with. Again, what happened a few days before the McStay family disappeared was someone called up QuickBooks, or someone went on QuickBooks and created a second account under Joseph McStay's name. The prosecution wants us to think that was Charles Merritt doing this illicitly. Are we sure about that? No, hard to say based on the testimony we've heard. Just before the break, we heard from Ryan Baker, who used to work with QuickBooks. He actually took the phone call from a person calling saying they were Joseph McStay, asking questions about deleting one of the accounts, and so on. But ultimately, that request really never went anywhere because when Ryan Baker tried to follow up, he heard nothing from that person via email or otherwise. Let's now hear how the defense cross-examined Mr. Baker.
I'm not sure.
Okay. And you knew that these were recorded because you mentioned it in your interview with Detective Hankey. You mentioned that these calls were recorded. Do you recall that?
Calls are recorded from time to time, yes, sir.
Okay. All of them are recorded. In fact, you don't even have a choice. When you pick up a call, it gets recorded, and you have no way of disengaging the recording feature. Is that correct, Mr. Baker?
Objection, argument, since that's not in evidence.
The objection sustained is argumentative. If there was an answer, it's stricken.
Mr. Baker, you worked in the customer support service role for how many years? 15 years. Is the recording device and that is used with the inbound support, requests from customers, is that something that is used as a training tool?
So apparently, QuickBooks policy, all of the phone calls that come into customer service are supposed to be recorded. This one was not. While the witness on the stand, Ryan Baker, worked there a while, he couldn't really explain why this call was not recorded. Any significance in your mind, Marni?
Right, probably some. I mean, this has happened to me before where I tried to keep something out of evidence because I didn't think that the witness they were going to present instead of a recording was as reliable, and it shouldn't be what's presented instead of a recording, and that evidence should be kept out. And so you're trying to show the jury exactly what you argued at a motion to keep it out. You're trying to show the jury, can we really rely on this guy's memory when he takes a million different phone calls and he doesn't have the recording of this one? Or is it more likely that he's remembering something a little bit different than what happened, and then argue it the way that you'd like the jury to see it?
I mean, or does it just happen that sometimes the calls don't get recorded? I mean, I don't know how exactly this works, whether he had to press record or it automatically records. So was it a slip up on his part, or was the system not working? There's still a lot of questions there for me. But let's go on and hear the rest of the redirect, and then we can kind of come back and piece together what the significance of this was.
Just a minute. Anything else, Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes. Mr. Baker, you indicated that you have reviewed a message or some notes regarding a call on 8. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any information that a transfer actually took place of the data on the 8th?
No, ma'am.
And were you able to determine from the email that you read whether a disk was actually sent out for QuickBooks on the 8th? Okay. Knowing that a phone call came in for a transfer of data on the 8th, and then still receiving that phone call on the 9th asking for a deletion of data, do you still find that call to be unusual on the 9th? Why?
Most business owners, anyone who has their data anywhere in a cloud or anywhere like that, the main thing that's worried about is protection. They don't want anything to happen to their data. What if something goes wrong? What's my contingency? What's my backup? What's my backup of a backup? This is my company information. It's my livelihood. That's what most people tend to think about it and at least perceive off in their phone call.
Now, if somebody puts a desktop version on, there's also the ability to access that online. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
And you indicated that you would, I know there was a good deal amount of time spent on a particular slide with all of Mr. McStay's accounts, but the notes that you made and the information that you made for that caller had the specific email address of custom@earthinspiredproducts.com. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the caller indicated to you that he was Joseph McStay, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in terms of the data, I don't think you got to finish your answer, but you indicated there was a difference between exporting data and deleting data. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, the data can be exported once a day, twice a day.
So some more testimony there, the redirect of this representative from QuickBooks, Ryan Baker, talking about how unusual a call of this nature was, the call that came in from the person claiming to be Joseph McStay, asking to delete data. Is that strange? He said, yes, it is strange, because what if something goes wrong? What if there's no backup? Talking about the desktop version, the mobile version, and we heard the prosecutor say again, and the caller told you he was Joseph McStay, and he said yes. I think, for me at least, the testimony got a little confusing there, just when he starts talking about the cloud and exporting the data or removing the data, whatever it is. Marni, I mean, a witness like this, I mean, does it have much impact on a jury?
I don't see this having much impact. It seems like a bunch of different types of speculation are going on by the prosecution, and I don't think the jury is going to really like that at all. On the other hand, this is going to be a 6-month trial, and we're going to, I mean, the jury is certainly going to give the prosecution the benefit of some doubt, not in the same legal terms that we talk about reasonable doubt, but they're going to say, okay, maybe they'll connect it for me later on, and if they don't, I'll put it out of my mind, because it is a highly circumstantial case and a long, long case also. Yeah, I mean, although going back to what we were saying, I mean, I do think the QuickBooks, this stuff, although it's, kind of a bit detailed, it does, it is somewhat important, because if Merritt or someone else did call up and create a fake account under Joseph McStay's name, obviously they're doing something wrong, and they have some bad intent, whatever that is. Right. I mean, and that's exactly where the jury is thinking the prosecution is going to go, that they have to connect this all up. And so right now it does seem kind of like, in isolation, not the most interesting testimony, but maybe some of this speculation that we're doing right now turns into fact for the jury when we hear some more evidence. Yeah, and I mean, I think the most significant part about the QuickBooks is the fact that these checks were created in Charles Merritt's name. Now, could the other associate have done that to kind of set him up? I mean, there are all kinds of theories here. We'll see what plays out over the next few months. Before we go, I want to get your final thoughts, because again, this is a 6-month trial. We're almost, about a month in now, 17 days so far, and you said it doesn't seem like the prosecution has proved much in this time. Yeah, it really doesn't seem like we're getting there. I mean, on one hand, you can say, why are we 2 months in and I don't hear anything that is super compelling? On the other hand, you could say we're only 2 months in of a 6-month trial and they have a lot of work to do connecting these dots. So, I mean, it's really worth staying with it. These are kind of rare cases that you get to see something this intricate. Absolutely. And of course, we will be staying with it here. Marni, thank you so much for being with us. As always, great to have you. Thank you all for watching this afternoon. Stay tuned. The Daily Debrief with Aaron Keller coming up right after this break.
News.